Alwyn.
And guys, I've actually remembered to
Murray's
start
there.
the recording.
Yeah, I see.
We'll give everybody a few minutes. I'm assuming you guys, when I speak, you just see the Porsche.
That's right.
That's right.
I thought we'd stick to that portion of the screen.
Da, da, da.
What are you doing? Morse code there for a second, Perry?
I'm just working on the lighting.
No, if you tilt it up like that, you look light-headed.
I say, that's okay. We don't need to see you, bro.
Oh, I'm tired. I'm tired.
Yep.
Tired of not working, not
I've
having
been
to work.
leaning over my track. I've been on my track. I've been under my track.
But at least you're on the right track now.
I am.
Mhm.
And
No,
are
I
you
just
back into
came
schedule?
in about half hour ago from replacing the floor in my shed.
Oh.
10 by 8 with full of stuff in my bike, and the floor was all damaged from water, so I had to pull everything out, lay a new floor, do some electrical work. So
Wow.
yeah,
Oh, nice.
not so fun holiday projects.
Holiday. That's
holiday.
right. You're on holidays. You're on vacation.
Yep.
Hey, Olin, I noticed there's a lot of different out of range phone numbers there. Are some of the other people from back east and California and that possibly joining in, or what's happening there?
No,
No? Okay.
no, it's just us chickens.
Just as chickens, huh? Just as local chickens.
Yeah, it's unless
Kevin.
Hey, Kevin. Hello.
Kevin.
Hello.
you're there. Okay, we're up to 9 people. And Murray, we can actually see you as well.
Finally figured this camera out, I think.
Hey, Murray.
Murray.
All right.
Looks good, Murray.
The visual.
You're seeable and hearable.
And I need a haircutable.
Yeah, it's.
I just want some. Here that is.
What's going on?
We have a variety of hairstyles around here, or lack of hairstyles.
Mhm.
Okay, let's see if I can present. And the dog is subbing for John.
Yeah, I see that. It's cutie. Much cuter than John.
Well, that's not very difficult, is it? Where is he? Could he hear me there? Guys, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got a GVS Slot.it Group C tuning workshop.
Yeah. I think well, I don't know if it's going to be necessary to, you know how to select that you select one person's screen, and never mind if anybody else talks, you still just see that screen.
I pinned you.
Ouch! Is this some kind of voodoo that you're doing, Perry?
No, I said I pinned your screen.
No, you said you pinned me.
Pinned video. So it stays with you.
All right.
Where does that come up? I'm just curious.
I went to Alwyn's picture of his horse there, and on the top right, there's an option. You put your-
Oh, okay, right.
Hey, Perry,
Yeah.
you get that dough, dude?
Oh yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
You didn't get an email response?
No?
Oh, really? Well, it's in my account, so it's all good.
Good stuff.
Alwyn, do you still want me to hang on to your driver?
Yes, please. Sorry, I've just not, what with one thing and another and playing full-time nurse, I just haven't gotten out there, Perry. So if you don't mind.
No need to apologize.
How's your wife doing, Owen?
Very good. Thank you very much, Murray. She's, yeah. So, thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Good.
Where
Okay,
is she?
gentlemen, shall we start?
Good.
I have no dissenting voices, and the people that aren't here cannot dissent. So,
Yeah.
I'll
Go for it.
I just text Jamie to say, "Are you coming?" So he knocks on my door. What are you doing here, man? He's like, "Well, you said are you coming?" Like, no, the Group C. Oh, so he should be around shortly.
so it goes. Okay, guys. Tonight is front end setup, and I've sort of broken down into the things that I just quickly want to go over this evening. Sort of split into guide, braid, the guide height, the front axle, and then some extra thoughts to finish off with. First off, in terms of the guide itself, and now you should be able to see my little car.
Yep.
The standard guide is the clip-in one, and I suppose I should pin my own video here as well so that I can see myself, what I'm showing you guys. There we go. Okay, so this is the little clip-in guide. I am not a big fan because they tend to be sloppy and it's difficult to adjust the height. So out it goes. This is the new and improved, or the regular, the SICH10, I believe it is, that I put in the screed for the rules. I just like them a lot better because they, you know, you can adjust the height. You can remove all the slop. They're just much more solid. So that's the one thing I wanted to cover. So really, I would suggest get yourself a one of the screwing guides. Otherwise, you'd be screwed. The next thing that I wanted to chat about is the stock guides of the new cars come with grub screws that hold the braid and the wire into the guide. I don't like them. I think sometimes I believe they cut the wire, and after using them a bit, I just think the risk of breaking the lead wire is that much greater. I prefer to use old-fashioned ferrules, and the ferrules I like are the NSR metal ones. Everybody sells them. You can use the Slot.it ones as well. The reason why I prefer the NSR ones, they're slightly bigger. They fit slightly better. They really go in solid. So that's why I prefer the NSR foo-ferrules, also known as ferrules. Okay, so I suppose we should take a look at, ta-da, the big reveal. Fitting is pretty darn straightforward. What you need to look out for is, if you take a look over here, you got to make sure that the guide is lower than the top. The top of the guide should be lower than the top of the holder. If it isn't, you can clamp the screw and the washer down on top of the guide post, and then there's slop up and down vertical play in the guide. Normally with slotted stuff, it's not an issue. What you should do to fix it is you get with the slotted guides, you get little self-tapping screws, and they've got itty-bitty tiny little washers. I've just bought some slightly larger washers because I feel more comfortable with it covering the whole of the top of the guide holder. So, can you guys hear me okay? Is the volume all right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of groaning going on right now.
Yeah, but we're all grown men.
You need smaller fingers.
Steve had your coffee today.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Okay, so what we want to do is to make sure that we tighten it enough that we remove as much play as is possible, but without jamming it down so that it can't turn. If it can't turn, the car tends to handle strangely. So all you want to do is make sure that it turns freely. If you can't get it quite up to freely, even 2 Li is okay, I suppose. 4 Li is too much. And there you have it.
Mhm.
That wasn't too hard, was it? Do most of you have screw-in guides, or are you still with the clip-in guides?
I'm in the process of changing all mine over.
Okay.
When
Yeah,
we
I
use
just
the clippers,
I think it's worth the investment. Okay. Next step is I'll try to share this again. So we've taken screw versus clip, ferrule versus grub screw, installing a little bit of play, not binding, centering. This is something we'll get to just now when we put in the braid. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is the braid. Now, there are a couple of things to look out for. You've seen the silverish braid and then the bronzish braid. So tinned or not. I prefer not tinned, but I really don't think it's a big deal. Some of the slotted cars, especially some of the older ones, came with tremendously springy braids. Toss them. And it lifts up the front of you can just about never get the front end down fully. So you need soft braid. There are any number of brands of braid. I prefer to use NSR. They sell a soft braid that you can get in a roll like this. And then the roll consists of a whole lot of different pieces like this all together that you can disassemble using scissors. So it is relatively inexpensive and it is very soft and flexible. But it's still, I've never had, in a long proxy series, I haven't had any of it wear out. So the next thing on the braid, so you can get pre-cut NSR braid. It just costs more per inch. So just buy the roll. And installing, let's take a look at how we're supposed to install this. First off, you need to get the ferrules on the wire. Make sure that you've got enough uninsulated wire.
you bring in the stripper at this point.
Yes,
Yes. Bring in the strippers.
we'll address that later. What I like to do is to have the uninsulated part long enough. If you take a look at this, you can see, can you see that the wire comes back almost back to the top again?
Yeah.
Yep.
And with a little bit of uninsulated wire still out, bang my knuckle, at the top, because that way you can get the lead going off at a nice angle, which is what you want to do. And once you've done that, it is a matter of, you don't even have to rinse, you can just repeat.
A question on your guides. has anybody used 3D printed guides? Or are they any good?
I've not used them. I'm suspicious of them because of the way that they're made. Because they're laminated, I'm afraid that they're going to break. I just don't know if they're strong enough. And I don't feel like taking a chance because the other guide, sorry, that you can use, guys, I should have taken this out, is the ones that I specified are these Scale Auto ones. You get 2 of them for like $5 or $4. I just wouldn't take the chance with 3D, but by all means, if, I don't know. I don't think anybody in the group has tried them, have they?
I mean,
I'm not prepared to be the guinea pig. This is cheap enough, just like me, that I'd rather use either the slotted ones or the Scale Auto ones. And the Scale Auto model I did put in the rules. So if you're interested, they are cheaper and they are as good. The only extra thing with them, if you take a look at the post, is a lot longer, but you just trim that to suit. All righty then. Next step is getting, if you have a nice new clean braid, it's easy to get into the opening. It's only when you've removed it once or twice and it's been flattened out that it becomes a real pain in the lower back. I tend to put, because these ferrules are bigger, they're fine going in front where the sort of loopy part. You know, in the guide itself, there's like a loop or a cutout for the ferrule. Your choice. If you have the small slotted ferrules, I tend to stick them behind the braid, not in front of the braid. That way they stick better, for whatever that's worth. So now you have this long piece of braid sticking out the bottom. I've found typically cars don't go well like this.
oh,
But
That
wait.
explains it.
Yeah, that's some important guidance there. And guys, this, I mean, you've all done this several thousand times yourself, so there's nothing new
No.
here.
No, I haven't.
You haven't?
Not several thousand.
My wife has told me 1,000,000 times I shouldn't exaggerate so much. Okay, I'm not going to try and keep this in front of the camera because it's very uncomfortable. Okay, so you end up with 2 sets of braids, like buck teeth.
buck teeth.
The next step is I tend to cut these. I cut these by hand. I mean, I did use scissors, so not my fingers. But what you want is I keep them long to start, and then I cut them because what you want to do is to have them relatively long, sort of by the end of the guide, the top plate of the guide. Definitely not up to the end of the blade itself. So then you get these and you hold it over a garbage can and you trim them so that they're I'll be back after I trimmed it. And this is the worst scissors in the whole world.
Hi, guys.
Are you still at the door, John?
Hi, Jay.
John, Jamie.
No, I'm here.
Can't see your picture.
That's because I'm too ugly. I don't want to put it on there.
Again.
Okay, so I've trimmed them so that when you bend them back, like Beckham, and you need to flatten these with your thumbnails because you want them to lay as flat as possible to start. So that gives you an indication of the length that I go for. So I'll go to any lengths to get it properly. I also tend to push back, just push them, push back, push forward, so that you just broaden. It's hard to see, but you see, because I pushed from the end, it's sort of gone wider. And after you've done that, make very sure that it is laying as flat as possible. Some people like to just have the end of the braid slightly lifted up. But what you're trying to do is to get it as flat as possible. And Kevin, once you've done it 1,000 times, you'll be just as incompetent as I am.
I got bigger fingers than you too, so.
Okay. What you would normally do, but I'll go into that at the final setup, because what you want to achieve with the wires is that the guide now is movable, and you're going to end up to have the wires pushed down in such a way that the guide is self-centering, so that when you deslot, it's not off at 45-degree angle, the guide, and the marshal doesn't take 28 seconds to get your car back in the slot.
I'm sorry.
No names, no petrol. If you just shut up, nobody would have worried about it.
Say. Gave yourself up, bro.
Okay. So now we have all of this set up. So we've gone through tinned or not. I prefer not. Soft or hard, has to be soft. Rand, I prefer NSR, but good slotted braid, good Ninko braid. There's a lot of other brands that are soft as well. The big thing is it has to be soft. The length, I've showed you that it cut it so that it goes to the end of the plate, but not to the end of the guide itself. The height, try and get it as flat as possible. The next thing we're going to take a look at is the guide height, because the guide is going to determine how high the front end of your car is. So first thing first, before you start, remember at this stage, I am assuming that both the front and the rear tires have been glued and trued and brought to the diameter that you wanted. Everybody nods and says, yes, definitely, I've done that, right?
Yes.
Right. The next thing you want to do, remember about 6 months ago, I think it was, we went through flattening the chassis and flattening the pod. Now what we want, we're going to do a preliminary setup to start off with, because there's going to be some fine tuning, which is part of the next lesson, next workshop. But what you want to do is have your pod set up roughly at this stage, the way that it would be when it's done. So say 1 turn loose on all the screws. And don't tell me you can't do it, because we've all got a screw loose. Okay? But the one thing to do at this stage is please make sure that when you loosen the pod, make sure that you loosen it evenly on both sides so that it doesn't sit like that. I mean, slightly exaggerated, you know, that it sits flat. All good?
All good.
The next thing you have to do is to make sure that the front tires are not in the way. So you make sure that they're at their highest position so they're out of the way, because what we want to do now is take a look at the height of the chassis based on the position of the guide. So typically what I do here is I make sure with a little bit of weight over here, just pushing on it just to make sure that it sits relatively flat. And now I want to measure how high the chassis is off the ground. Any suggestions as to what kind of height we should be looking at?
Millimeter.
Yeah, preferably a little bit over a millimeter, but preferably not less than a millimeter in any case.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the serious racing will tell you it's 1.2 millimeters, and if it's less than 1.2 millimeter, you're going to get a knock on the door and somebody's going to come shoot you, or something like that. Good grief. I've gone and lost something here. Oh, no, I haven't yet. Okay, so, and you remember from the chassis setup side, we're talking about how to measure the height. We use our special tool, drill bits. So what I will do is, on this one, the 1 millimeter slides in freely. The 1.5 does not. So this is accurate enough. It's between 1 and 1.5. So I am happy. Some of the cars can be rather low. In that case, NSR sells guide spacers. So say your height is like, it ends up at something like 0.5 millimeters. You can get different thicknesses of NSR spacers or any other spacer that you can make fit. All you then do is just remove, I'm not going to remove the guide now, guys. Remove the guide and place over the guide post, put the spacer and screw it a sufficiently thick spacer to get you just over 1 millimeter clearance up front. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
All the slot shops sell NSR, different thicknesses of NSR spacers. If you need some, I've got a variety in the short term. I told you I'm like the local spares warehouse. I can certainly provide you with some if you're looking for some. If the car is too high, then I suppose you'll have to use a minus 0.2 millimeter spacer. You're just out of luck. If it's too high, I don't know that there's anything you can do about it. Any questions or comments on front end height initial setup?
What do you do if it's way too high? How do you bring it down?
You weren't paying attention. I just said I don't know. I've never slotted. I have never ever, Kevin, had it too high. If you use a slotted or a scale auto guide, the thicknesses are such that it doesn't end up pushing the nose particularly high. Sometimes I've had that the nose is a touch low, but never high. So the short answer is I don't know.
Oh, no, yeah.
Because as I said, you don't get minus 0.2 millimeter spacers.
Yeah.
Spacers made out of antimatter.
So this is something we need to come up with, I guess.
No, I've never needed it before. So
No, I'm kidding.
I tend to be very careful with antimatter. It tends to cause all kinds of nonsense. And it might make your car too light. I need a swallow of water now. Okay, so now we're at the point where we've got the guide fitted, we've got the leads fitted, the braid fitted, and the front end is approximately the right height. Now, the next step is, so we've covered pretty much all of this. Now we'll be taking a look at the front axle. And firstly, old chassis versus new, grub screw versus those caps. The caps, guys, are a challenge. You'll have to end up with the caps, you'll have to kludge it to get the height right. So I'm going to concentrate on the grub screws for now. But if you have the caps, what you'll have to do is try and if the wheels have to go down, just grind a little bit off the cap so that they sit lower. You know, the axle sits lower on top of the caps. But then you've got some play at the top end. And typically the little hoops on the old chassis, you know, with the new chassis, you can see it's nice and wide. So you can get in the grub screw fits in there. The old chassis are very narrow. There isn't any space for a grub screw. So yeah, you can get some space at the bottom, but then to shimmer down, one would have to become creative in some way, shape, or form. What I've also done in the past is with for instance, fly chassis. I would take a plastic bushing from an electric car or whatever, and put it on the axle inside here and remove so that there's no interference either way. Then I set it up so the chassis sits right, and I glue the bushing to the uprights over here. Does that make sense? Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's unadjustable, but at least that way you've got the basic height right. So all that I typically is just I have a bushing here and a bushing there. I put some weight over here just to make sure that the braid is flat. I put a little bit more weight than that normally. And then I just put some super glue, some super gel super glue over here. And once that sits, I use some E6000 to glue that bushing solidly in place. It is not perfect, but it is better than having one wheel a millimeter off the ground and the other one pushing the guide out of the slot. I think I showed people the SCC axle blocks.
Yep.
Those little thingies. Guys, can you see this stuff relatively clearly?
Yep. Yep.
Yes, very good.
Okay.
Yeah, you didn't like those, you said, Aldwin.
I like them if you have no other alternative. My biggest concern with them is it's a potload of work to get them installed properly. And secondly, a set costs almost as much as a brand new Slot.it Evo 6 chassis with the adjustable front height.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like $4 versus $6 or something like that. So if you give me a choice, I sure as hell would rather spend the $6 and get the latest chassis than $4 and then spend a couple of hours working on getting those axle blocks glued and screwed and etc. etc. Okay, we all good with that? Right, so the next thing we need, typically when you get a slotted car, You see these grub screws over there.
Yep.
If you take a look at your new slotted, they're not there. You typically have to provide your own grub screws, which I thought was a bit cheap ass, but whatever. For the top, you can use the regular grub screws that go on the wheels and the gears, etc. The normal, they're M2, and you can get them 2 millimeters long. You can use the 3 millimeters as well, but 3 millimeters is getting a bit long. At the bottom, you need a longer grub screw. If you take a look at the way that it's not an enclosed pocket that this sits in. It just has two little legs sitting up like this, and the grub screw is supposed to come, screw fit on the insides of this and remain in place. I'm concerned that it can wiggle up and down. So it is best to have a decently long grub screw to put in from the bottom. 5 millimeters or 6 millimeters is right. This is a 6 millimeter one. So it's M2 by 6 millimeters. And I've got one in there already. This is highly technical. Okay. A 6 millimeter goes in mostly through the chassis, and it reaches the right height at the wheels, and it doesn't stick out below the bottom of the chassis. So it is 6 millimeter is the ideal. Alrighty then. The next step is firstly on the front axle. I've still on this car, I've got the plastic wheels. We've had a chat about this before. Are metal wheels on the front better? Metal wheels are better everywhere. But I find that the plastic wheels, the slotted plastic front wheels, are quite adequate. They're round enough, they're true enough, and they fit sufficiently tightly on the axle that I don't have any objections to them. No problem if you bought some metal wheels and put them on. Yes, they are just that little bit better. First thing to take a look at when you put the front wheels on is how much sideways play do you want to have? The answer is just enough so that it doesn't bind, to my mind. I don't like floppy sideways stuff. So with the plastic wheels, you just push it on until you have like a tenth up to a half a millimeter, not even a half a millimeter, less than that. A quarter of a millimeter is way more than enough. All you want to do is just make sure that it doesn't bind.
And all of those independent rotating front wheels, how do they work?
Quite well.
Independently.
Yes. The slotted ones, Murray, they use a hollow axle. Then you just screw the one wheel on normally. On the other side, you have to drill out the wheel just a smidgen so that it can turn freely on the axle. And you have to cut the axle to the exact length, and then you glue in a ferrule with a washer in the hollow axle to act as a stopper on that end. So all of that has to be done pretty damn exactly. And we spoke about it before. I'm really not convinced that it's worth the cost and the effort.
I was just going to say, is it worth the effort to do?
I'm not convinced. The furthest I would go for our purposes is to go the Sally Hansen route and coat the front tires and polish, re-true them afterwards so that they're zero grip. All that you really want to prevent, do you know the theory why you want zero grip?
No.
Wheels. The theory is if you go around a corner, the inside wheel is going at a smaller radius than the outside wheel. So the outside wheel is trying to turn faster than the inside wheel. So you get friction and you're upsetting the front end.
Because you have no differential, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
No independence.
Yeah. So because they're on a hard axle, that is what happens. Yes, you're differentialless. Now, typically I find, the car as it goes around the corner is going to lean a little bit, and you're going to have very light contact on the inside wheel. If you've then coated that wheel with Sally Hansen, it will slip. I mean, even just the regular low grip front tires. For our purposes, quite frankly, just so that you know, for this Group C series, I've trued these tires. They're the stock front tires that came with the car. I trued them, I profiled them as we went through on the tire truing session. That's it. I'm not going to coat them. I'm not going to polish them with anything else. I'm sure as hell not going to put in independent front wheels. I will go to that extreme for a proxy. And I'm still not sure whether it actually has any measurable benefit. All righty then. So now we've got the guide, the braid, we've got the settings over here. The front axle has got the right amount of play. We've set the right height over here at the back. So now we want to do our first pass of getting the front height set up properly. The way that I've started doing it over time, one finger to keep the braid to simulate the weight of there's going to be some weight here later on when we get to next week's workshop, and the body is on there, so there's still a little bit of spring in the braid. So to eliminate that, I just hold the front end down lightly. I make sure that we've got enough play up and down. So what I will then do is I will hold it down, and then on this wheel, I would make sure that there's a little bit of a gap so that there's some upward movement. And it's all but impossible to see because it's too small. You'll have to take my word for it. There's a little bit of, a fraction of a millimeter upwards play. So I will lower the scrub screw.
I guess he's in talks right now with Gary Bettman about seeing if they can have Vancouver be one of those host cities. Really, we have competition from Edmonton, which is ridiculous because, well,
I'm not going to, you get my drift. I'm going to make sure that I basically eliminate the slop upwards when the car is sitting in the right position. And then I'll do the same on this side. And
Hey, Jamie, you get your bird back?
No.
No. Sure sounds like it.
No, we've got two others.
Oh, okay.
We have our breeder is hand feeding and raising another one for us to hopefully fill the void.
Okay, guys, so you do this slowly and surely and meticulously so that when you're done, basically the front end isn't being lifted up by the tire, but you basically eliminated the available upward play. So this now is set the top of the axle at the correct height. Sounds
So,
good.
so it's critical that you adjust the top end first.
That's the way that I do it, Perry. I'm not sure how other people do it, but this to me makes an awful lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because what you're trying to do is to determine, this is easier than trying to screw around with the bottom screws. So, because what you end up with now, with relatively little hassle, is the top screws are in the position that sets the ride height of the axle. So to get the final adjustment, all you now do is from the bottom, you will find that there's a lot of height play. So all you want to do now is
Just snug
them up so that you remove all the play without locking the axle, because then your axle should be in the correct position.
That actually makes sense. I've done it the other way, and it's back and forth a lot of times. So
Yeah, that's a real pain in the lower back.
It actually makes sense.
Excellent.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Guys, just one thing that you have to be careful of when you do this. If you take a look, the top and bottom screws are not in a line. The top screw is over here, the bottom screw is over here. So if you don't do it carefully on both ends, you can skew the axle by you're removing the play if the other one is still loose over here, but the axle is skew. So you have to make very sure that both of them are just lightly touching from the bottom. Okay?
So you don't allow any movement at all for upward, like you're not allowing any irregularity in the track at all. You're actually going to be, if you're running that tight, if you go over a joint that's not quite right, then you're actually pulling your guide up a little bit, aren't you?
Yeah, I can live with that, Larry, because what are you trying to achieve with this front end setup? You don't really, what you're aiming for, sorry, I should have touched on this at the beginning. There are two distinct schools of thought about setting up front axles and wheels. The one is called the tripod, where you have like at least 0.5 millimeter clearance between the tire and the ground. The theory with that is that, you know, the front wheels really don't matter. All you want is all the weight on the guide, and that'll give you your best handling. There's a lot to be said for that. The other one is to just have the front tires just barely touching the track. The theory with that one is as soon as you start going around the corner and the car starts leaning, you start getting support from the outside tire. If you have a lot of upward slop, you won't get that support. So then you're levitating because you have no visible means of support.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I just remembered that, back in the old days on the wing cars and that, they didn't even run front wheels because they just ran on a tripod duct.
Yeah, I suspect. In some cases, a tripod is possibly faster and better handling, possibly. I don't think it's clear cut. For me, one of the pleasures I get from modern day slot cars is the fact that they are beautiful. They are scale models that look gorgeous.
Yeah, they still look like cars.
Yeah, and I would like to have the front wheels touching the track, and when the car is going around the track, the front wheel should turn. And in a lot of proxies and competitions, the rules would actually be written such that the front wheels have to touch the track. So largely because of that, I would prefer that let's do it the way that, you know, the industry norms are. We're not running wing cars. We're not running blobby vacuum formed bodies. We're running pretty scale cars, so let's try and conform to those rules. Okay, so at the end, what you'll be doing is once you've got that gross setup, you would be holding the car and looking at it and making sure that the tires are just touching, but it's not lifting, you know, it's not keeping the guide from being fully engaged. That's what you're aiming for at this stage.
Owen,
Yes, sir.
have you ever considered putting down a couple strips of copper tape to simulate the track?
Yes. And I find that the tape is thinner than the spring that you normally have in the braid in any case, Barry.
Yeah, it's not much. I actually measured some today, and the copper tape is like 0.06 mil.
Yeah.
Wow.
My problem is I'm not good enough to get into those kinds of tolerances. So it's so bloody thin.
Well, yeah, but even just with you saying that the ideal setup is 1.2, then the copper tape, if it's 0.02, then you'll still be with, you know, as long as you're under 1.5.
No, you're confusing the chassis height of the track and the tire height of the track.
Oh, forgive me. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
That's entirely okay.
Is that entirely with a Y?
Yes, of course.
In Britain.
Is there any other way of spelling tire?
Mhm.
I just wanted to dispel that fallacy. Guys, and that pretty much what you need to end up with is something that that just barely touches the track. If you run your fingers over it, it should be moving the car.
There's very little weight on those tires.
It's just touching. It is just barely touching.
Won't that change once you put weight on the chassis?
Yes,
That's
it
what I
will.
was just thinking too.
Yes, it will. But remember, I said when we're doing this,
Oh, you press down with
I
your
press
finger.
down.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
because that's I'm using the fingertip technique to simulate the body and
The weight, yeah.
weight
Mhm.
added. But the next workshop is going to be about fine tuning and final setup. When we talk about weight placement, amount of weight, pod taping, etc., and the amount of pod float, because all of those things are going to have a slight effect on the front end. And you're still going to, it's an iterative process, guys. So what we have here is a first pass setup, as I had in the notes. You're going to be tweaking it as you make other changes, because you know I said at the beginning we start with like a 1 turn loose on the pod, but you may end up with the pod screws being anywhere from half a turn loose to 1.5 turns loose, and that's going to make a difference on your front end setup, because now you're lowering or raising the back, and there is a difference, there is a leverage because of this. You know, if this happens, you're picking up the front tires. If you drop it, then you're picking up the guide. I exaggerate to just show the principle.
Yeah.
So the concept is you're still going to be, this is what we're trying to achieve here, is to get a setup that allows you to take a well-prepared car to the track to start the fine tuning.
Owen,
Yes.
we're adjusting the front axle to not bind side to side or you know, in turning. I've got a chassis where the axle is actually loose front to back, so the axle wouldn't stay perpendicular. So is that a bad chassis? Just get rid of that chassis, or is there anything you can do about that?
Did you flatten your chassis?
It was actually an NSR chassis, a 908. and I
Oh, a
changed the
different type of
chassis.
car. Yeah.
Yeah, but the idea is just, you know, is there anything that, does that affect the driving if the chassis, if the axle is loose and plays in that way?
When you started talking about loose front axles, I was expecting you to say it's an NSR. That is typical NSR. Is it ideal? I personally don't think it's ideal. Is it a train smash? I don't think so, because what you're talking about as this moves backwards and forwards, what you're doing is when it's in the right position, the top and bottom screws are, geez, you know, they're sort of like this. And the axle fits exactly between those two. If the axle moves this, you know, this way or that way, it's going to be, there'll be more vertical play. In practice, I think that the change is small enough that it's not a train smash. I personally find it curious and a bit disappointing that NSR has that slot back to front. And for instance, on the TT, the rules don't allow you to do anything about it. You're not allowed to fill up that gap. You're not allowed to put some kind of shim or anything in there. So, yeah, we just have to live with it.
Okay.
The Slot.it are much better.
Right.
All mine do that, and I just set up Jamie's brand new P68 last night, and it does it too.
Yeah, it's, remember guys, these are inexpensive, mass-produced injection molded parts. They're not high precision, and if it's a fraction of a millimeter, so be it. But yeah, it is that, John. That is so typical of NSRs. All of them. I don't think I've ever seen one that doesn't have what Tim described, the forward backward move.
Well, when John first looked at my P68, he suggested that it was made on a Friday.
That car definitely was made on a Friday.
John, my Corvette's the same way.
Yeah, that is. I haven't seen an NSR that doesn't happen. They're all, to my mind, they're all like that.
I thought I just got a Friday chassis for mine as well, and I thought it was just a rare thing. But
well, yeah, because the chassis, like we touched on in the workshop when we were in person, Alwyn was suggesting that with the NSRs you can't do the flattening process on the NSR.
Yeah, I'm scared of it.
Yeah, because they don't like it.
Yeah, they soften, and
what you got there, Perry? Yours going front to back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're, typical.
Yeah, that's exactly the same car that we have, Perry.
And guys, I thought while we were here, I mean, just look at my nicely trued and profiled front tire and my nice shiny, clean back tire that won't last 5 minutes.
I thought you were talking about your manicure.
Yeah. Okay, so that wasn't what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was this. So we've spoken about on the front axle the grub screws versus caps, the slot car corner axle adjusters. We spoke about the sideways play and then the height setup. A few extra comments. As I mentioned just now, guys, remember this is a first pass. The things that you do before you take the car to the track, basically, this gives you the basic starting point of the fine tuning. Next week, we will be doing the improved pod adjustment, the weight and the tape, etc., which are all starting points. And then after we've done all of that, we will just redo the, just do a quick fine tune of the front axle. And then we take it to the track and we start experimenting with more pod float, less pod float, more on the front, more at the back, more weight, less weight, weight here, weight there. And as we do that, and if there's a significant change, we have to redo the front end, you know, just tweak the front end to make sure that it's still okay. And that was sort of what I had in mind for this evening. The next thing is any questions or comments?
Got one.
Yes.
How do I get a setup block like that one?
There's this guy.
I know
his name's Alwyn.
No, there's this guy that deserted us and went to the island. Actually, I don't typically use this setup block. This is the setup block that I use. Now I'll have to go and. This is a slot car corner aluminum one. And guys, did you notice I said aluminum, not aluminium? I'm very proud of myself.
Good, good, not bad.
This is a high class piece of kit, unnecessarily expensive, but hey, what the hell? But it's not good for video like this because it's so bright. So that's why I went with this, because it screws up the exposure on the video camera.
I believe that is the very setup block that you lent me at our last live workshop.
That is it, because these are the only two blocks that I have.
Mm-hmm. Is that glass or is it plexiglass?
It's plexiglass. Luff made a whole bunch of them.
Nice.
He made a ton of them at one stage, so a lot of the old timers have them.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if you email him, you'd likely be able to get one.
Or we could hit Blair up. He's got polycarbonate.
I was just gonna say, don't bring that when I'm in the room and then turn around.
There is some advantage that you can take a look at this. You can clearly see from the bottom.
Yeah, exactly.
I must say, I can't recall ever having thought of doing that in real life. So clearly it's not an issue.
Yeah, that's cool.
Hey, Owen?
Yes, sir.
I'm just looking at mine here. I've got about, now I realize if I was to turn my tires down, I could get lower clearance, but, or slightly anyway.
At the back, you mean?
Pardon me?
At the back, you mean?
On the front.
Oh, does your car have the caps, not the screws?
Actually, I'm actually looking at my Mr. Slot car at this moment, and it's got about around the 2 millimeter in between. But my guide is probably almost a good 1.5 millimeters above the bottom of the slot, or where the braids are. So when you set your guide height, and you're putting a spacer in, how far do you want the bottom of the guide off the bottom of the slot?
Off the bottom of the chassis?
You cannot adjust that. That is determined by the depth of the blade.
Right, but I'm just saying that some of the blades are quite deep.
Yeah, you got to grind. If they're more than about 7 millimeters, you'll have to grind them, because otherwise they're going to hit the bottom of the slot.
Yeah.
Because remember,
depending on which track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of tracks you would have issues if you have 8 millimeter deep guide blades. But remember, Larry, when we started, we were setting up the height
right,
with front wheels off, no front wheels. So you're setting up the guide height with a blade resting on the track, assuming you have to accept that the bottom of the blade is not touching the bottom of the slot. You must, never mind assuming, you must make bloody sure that your blade is not that deep that it touches the bottom of the slot if you stick it in as hard as you can with braids on.
Well, it's like when I ran put the Slot.it deep guide on my Mosler, and Perry took a measurement for me and said, no, it's not going to work, because it wasn't working.
Yeah, had that.
Did we really need to measure it?
Yeah. Well, no, but you did, because I mean, I'm not.
There was sawdust coming up from the track, and you're done.
It left a dust trail behind it as it went.
Cutting a new groove.
Could I ask a question, Alan, please?
Yes, sir.
This information that you put on the tuning class this week, is this? Are you going to do a write up like last time, or is this going to be something that we can access somehow?
I will make some added comments on this one.
Right.
And I will also, I've recorded, this is the first time that I'm quite happy with how the video presentation has gone, guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to post, I've recorded it, and I will post it on YouTube.
Excellent. Excellent.
Great, great.
Just because I'd like to get your feedback on what you think of it when you look at it, seeing as you saw it live. If you could let me know what you think of it.
Would you, is it going to be just people with a link, or could I suggest that maybe you put it up as a public thing so that you can get some views from other enthusiasts?
I will certainly make it available to all and sundry.
That's a good idea.
Especially the guys that are in competition with us, so that they can follow my instructions and really screw up their cars.
Sabotage.
Yes.
There's a lot of enthusiasts out there.
No, I think that would be great, Alwyn, and also maybe bring some more interest to our club.
Yes, I'm all for that.
Alwyn, another question regarding the front wheels. I wouldn't necessarily want to change them over, but I'm thinking of doing it for all my cars if I want to true my front tires, because I have a Huddy tire truer and I have to take them off the axle to put them on the Huddy and all that sort of thing. And a screwed aluminum wheel works better on the Huddy.
Right, over.
Yeah, we've got those other truers that we're talking about. But what wheels, brands, or types are you suggesting? Is it like a CB design or Slot.it wheels, or what are the aluminum brands that you think are okay?
On a Slot.it car, I would just go for the aluminum replacement wheel. If I'm not mistaken, in the rules, Tim, I actually gave the model number of the applicable aluminum front wheel. I'll take a look at that again.
Okay, I'll look at it as well.
But but I wouldn't. The advantage of using the aluminum wheel, the Slot.it wheel, is the fact that it has the same hub on it,
right,
as the plastic. So it's a direct replacement without any fiddling or faffing or having to put any spacers in it.
That's perfect.
If you buy a CB design wheel, it is hubless. It's like that telescope, you know. No, that's Hubble. So then you have to put in spacers over here. So on a Slot.it car, I would buy Slot.it front wheels and be done with it.
Great, great.
But as you said, Alwyn, it's they're better, but it's negligible. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yes.
Yeah, if you have a tire raiser, or let's see if my German is correct, eine Reifenschleifenmaschine.
Oh, that's John's.
RSM. Yeah, just for your information, RSM is the abbreviation for Reifen, which is German for tires, Schleifen, which is grind, and machine, which is the machine.
Grind machine.
So that's where the RSM comes from.
Yeah, so that
cool.
That thing was the belt. You guys read that thing? The belt was too tight for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very strange.
Yeah, that's. Oh wow.
Owen.
Yes, sir.
What are you using for axle shims? Or spacers, or axle spacers?
I bought a potload of Slot Car Corner sells nylon or stainless steel shims in different thicknesses. They're cheap as borscht, and so I just buy a ton of them and I use them as required. I'm sitting right next to my drawer of spare parts. I'm trying to disreflect. This is what the 0.2 millimeter.
Got nobody to talk to.
So yeah, I have a ton of these, Perry, and they're consistent thickness. I have slightly thinner metal ones that they also bought from them, and the beauty of it is, as I say, they're cheap and they're decent quality. They're not warped. They're consistent thickness. They're just a good part.
So if you want to really get detail on your setup, are you trying to get your front axle or your wheels as wide apart as you can?
Typically, yes. Yeah, so if I'm preparing a proxy car, I would put in spacers and get it so that it just clears the inside of the fender.
But again, they can't protrude the fender, correct? According
I hate slot cars with wheels sticking out of them. I just dislike it intensely. And on top of that, it's typically the wheels would be higher than the rim of the fender. So how are you going to get it to stick out without having the body raised?
Rub,
or
yeah.
the body apart. So it's one of my little pet peeves, and you sure as hell wouldn't be able to enter that in a proxy or any.
That's what I was meaning. Like it would if you take them out too far, you obviously would
break the rules.
All rules of all proxies that I've ever seen clearly states wheels and tires will not be visible when viewing the car from the top. Unequivocal.
So your attitude is you're going to take it to the limit all the time.
Inside because I mean, remember, Perry, as I said, the wheel, the top of the wheel is higher than the bottom of the fender. You know, the visible part of the fender. So how can you have it go past there?
Right. I'm not talking about going past, but you make it a point of going as wide as you can.
Yeah. Without touching.
Without touching, yeah.
So the spacers might not be a bad idea.
Useful, perhaps?
Yes. Yeah, I think the way that the slotted cars are set up when you get them, there's really not much. You know, can I get an extra 1/10 of a millimeter in there? Maybe. Would I bother? I think this is getting too close, because you may end up winning a fraction of a millimeter, and then with body float and pod float, you start going around a corner and the tire touches the body and you're off. Guys, don't underestimate the very bad effect of a front tire touching the body. A front tire touching the body around a corner will de-slot you 99 times out of 100, because all of a sudden it unsettles the car. It breaks, breaks as in stop, not shatter. It breaks that wheel and it completely upsets the car.
That makes sense, yeah.
Make very, very, very sure that with the full movement of body float and pod float, etc., the tires do not touch anywhere. That's part of next week's workshop, when we're talking about more fine tuning and final putting together and prep before you go to the track. So I'm sort of jumping the gun here. Comments, questions? Not everybody ought to get, sorry, I don't speak parrot.
Dr. Doolittle.
Of course there is. In which case, are we calling it a night?
Yeah, that's great. Owen, thank you very much. This is super.
Yeah, thank you, Owen.
It's a pleasure. I suspect 99% of what I said you guys already know, but I thought, well, it's always cool just to talk about it.
I'm looking forward to the YouTube video, because then I can do it at my leisure and pause it and so on and so forth. So my Class C is in the same condition that it was when we had the workshop live here at our complex. So I've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, but then again, COVID has kindly gotten you a lot of time to do it.
Yeah.
Look on the bright side. That's a sick job.
Well, yeah. Are we having a meeting on Friday as per usual?
Yep. Yes. I will.
Do we have any special guests attending that we should know about, or?
I've been copying Greg, what's his face from Washington, but he hasn't joined us yet. He has a Wednesday evening global thing that he's advertised on Home Racing World, Slot Car Illustrated, and on Slot Forum. So that he does on Wednesdays, I believe. I've never tuned in because I've never felt the desire.
It'd be nice if Luff came on one of these meetings.
Yeah.
That would be lovely.
Hi, Nick.
Hi. Hi.
Okay. In that case,
Has anybody talked to Crosley about, or even mentioned to him that we were thinking about maybe doing this rotating at the Perry's and the Tanix?
I mentioned it to him.
I was thinking about giving him a phone call and asking or saying, because I know he hasn't been tagging in on these things, but maybe he's just wondered. Sorry, somebody said they mentioned it to him?
I mentioned it to him, Larry.
I actually talked to him. I saw him on Monday on my way back from the North Shore, picking up something from him.
Oh, yeah.
He's still alive.
That's good.
That's good.
He's awfully quiet these days. I actually sent him an email and said, "Hey, is everything okay?"
Yeah. No, I stopped by and picked up a tape laying tool because I put down new copper on my track, and
oh, cool.
I ended up, it was just frustrating. I didn't use it. I kept breaking the tape, and I said, "Screw this!" I did it by hand.
How did it work out, Perry?
Yeah, it's good. Well, I've got the one track is basically done. I'm doing the electrics right now, but I painted the whole table. I told you that. Painted the track. All the colors are on now.
Nice.
Oh,
So
nice.
It looks good.
I didn't know that.
So so BC is going to start phase 2 next Tuesday after the long weekend. Is there any possibility we could start racing on some level, like maybe 6 guys?
Gotta be
I think probably the committee guys should get together remotely and just chat, and then we'll send something out. I think that's the way to go about it. Right,
because I think it could be done, but we have to be very cautious about it.
Yeah, we'll have to decide whether it's worth the risk to have organized racing. So we'll just have to figure it out what makes sense.
Yeah. Has anybody been down to Tanix recently?
And Dan's the only
Ron
one.
has.
Hey, Ron.
Yeah.
Hey.
Ron might have.
How you doing?
Dan comes by once or twice a week.
Yeah.
He's got it down to 9.3 now, his fastest time. But the track's all ready to go. If anybody's got free time, you're more than welcome to come down.
We're coming down tomorrow, bud.
Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah.
John and I are coming tomorrow. We'll have our medical grade masks, gloves, sanitizer, all the good stuff.
No, that's good. I want some input on what you think of the track.
Dying to try that thing, man.
Dying to race on the pandemic?
Yes.
Watch out when you come out of the corner going underneath the bridge, you don't lose your back end. You'll end up running into a post.
A lot of deep, dark corners in there, so you got to be careful.
Did I hear right that the timing system is actually on it too now?
Everything's working. Everything's ready.
Excellent.
On both tracks, right?
Well, Roger's been.
Are all 3 lanes operational, or is it just 2? Because sorry,
everything's working with the latest in timing. Everything's updated on the Tanix track and the pandemic. Both of them have got the latest of what Roger's got in so far.
excellent.
And what kind of a controller hookup have you got for the Tanix? Is it
Exactly the same thing.
It's on the pandemic, so you've got the whole the boxes and everything else?
Boxes, everything's in there. Yeah, it's ready.
Oh, it's adjustable power supply and everything.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Will you, Ron? Will you be joining John and I tomorrow afternoon?
Probably at a distance. You know.
Okay.
Good call.
You know, as long as you want in there, you know, you'll be mostly on your own. You know, I'll come in by to say hello, whatever, right?
Yeah, right on.
If you've got questions or something, I'll be in the back working anyways.
Hey, thanks for making the track, man.